Glance at any map of Canada, and that enormous chunk missing from the continent jumps right out. That's Hudson Bay, a weird, shallow ice factory that spawned history's biggest corporate powerhouse. Even more crucially, it functions like a savage weather generator, locking down the nation in ice and shoving 90% of Canadians tight against the U.S. border. How does this remote Arctic inlet flip Canada's entire landscape upside down? To get why Hudson Bay is so odd, start with its gigantic proportions. Nestled in northeastern Canada, it rubs up against Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec provinces, plus Nunavut territory up north. The Hudson Strait links it eastward to the Atlantic Ocean, while the Fox Basin hooks it northward to the Arctic Ocean. Sheer size-wise, it's a monster at over 1.2 million square kilometers, the world's second biggest bay, about half as large as the Bay of Bengal. For scale, imagine plopping Texas inside it and still having space for all of California. It's basically an inland ocean through and through. Yet despite matching some top-tier waters in surface sprawl, plunge below the surface, and you'll hit a freaky geological twist that sets it worlds apart from linked seas. Oceans like the Pacific or Atlantic boast epic plunges into abyssal depths and trenches thousands of meters down. Hudson Bay, a measly average of 100 meters deep amid its vast spread. Think Pacific as an Olympic pool. This bay's just a puddle after a downpour. Geologically, it's no ocean basin. Experts dub it an epicontinental sea, perched atop the continental shelf. North America's landmass keeps rolling right under it, with seawater pooling in a broad, shallow dip on the Canadian Shield. That shallowness sparks yet another oddity, the water quality. Grab samples, one from the Atlantic, one from Hudson Bay, and test salinity. The bay's way fresher. Reason? It drains a huge swath of North America, bottoming out a watershed spanning millions of square kilometers and slurping runoff from distant Rockies westward. Rivers like the Churchill, Nelson, and Severn pour in billions of gallons of fresh water daily. Being mostly enclosed, with slim straits to the open sea, that deluge doesn't rush out. It hangs around, watering down the salt across the bay. This flood of fresh water creates a quirky chemical effect, morphing Hudson Bay into a colossal ice producer. Freshwater ices up quicker and at warmer temps than seawater. Pair that with the bay's slim profile and low salt, and it flips with the seasons fast. Come brutal Canadian winter, the full 1.2 million square kilometers lock into solid ice, blending seamlessly with nearby tundra as thick pack ice that serves polar bears' hunting paths. Short summers melt it all back to liquid. Such wild freeze-melt swings are rare so far south. Parts match London's latitude exactly. London gets soggy, mild winters. Hudson Bay, a iced-over hellscape. And that's not all. Its quirky depth, diluted water, and ice extremes aside, the bay's pulling another geography-defying stunt. It's steadily contracting. Last ice age, the colossal Laurentide ice sheet, miles deep, smashed this zone, squashing the crust into the mantle and scooping out today's shallow bowl. Ice gone, the load lifted. Now the underlying and encircling land undergoes isostatic rebound, crust springing upward like a mattress in super slow motion. It's climbing roughly half an inch yearly, gradually siphoning the bay and bearing fresh coastlines. Hudson's Bay is a shallow, frigid expanse of mostly fresh water that's steadily pushing up from the ground. So how did this icy, uplifting basin turn into the launch pad for one of history's mightiest corporate juggernauts? We'll unpack that story shortly. But first, picture the ground under Hudson's Bay buried deep beneath endless sheets of ice. Geologically, this bay is a fresh addition to the landscape. About 10,000 years back, as the final ice age wrapped up and glaciers pulled away, rising oceans poured in, inundating the huge, squashed depression the ice had carved out. Yet for over half the year, this tough, icebound sea has never stood empty. Its shores have long sheltered diverse indigenous groups, including the Inuit up north and the Cree and Dean First Nations down south. Far from a barren ice desert, the bay formed a vibrant, bountiful habitat that supplied nearly all their survival needs. These communities didn't merely tough out the bay's extreme freeze and thaw swings, they turned them to their advantage. Summers meant paddling open seas to chase beluga whales and seals. Come winter, when the bay locked into thick ice, that frozen sheet became a vast, level superhighway. With dog sleds, they roamed huge stretches over the ice, hunting polar bears and caribou herds that roamed the frozen coasts. They tamed a landscape that could swiftly doom any novice wanderer. And talking of ill-equipped outsiders, the initial Europeans who blundered into the bay met swift catastrophe. Back in the early 1600s, European nations were fixated on discovering the Northwest Passage, a fabled sea path across North America, offering a fast track to Asia's rich spices. In 1610, English explorer Henry Hudson steered his vessel, the Discovery, through a perilous, ice-jammed channel and emerged into a gigantic stretch of water. He figured he'd struck gold, gazing at what seemed like endless ocean. He hadn't. He'd merely entered the bay soon named for him. Hudson spent months charting its eastern edges, venturing deeper south in a frantic hunt for an outlet. But as fall slid into winter, the bay's unforgiving traits hit hard. Its shallow fresh water iced over fast, locking the Discovery in place. The crew hunkered down on land through a savage winter, fighting scurvy, hunger, and bitter cold. When spring thawed the ice at last, Hudson itched to press on. His men had reached their limit. In a notorious mutiny from the annals of exploration, they seized control, shoved him, his young son, and 7 steadfast sailors into a tiny rowboat, ditched them in the vast bay, and headed home to England. Hudson and his followers vanished forever. You might figure that a frigid, inescapable ice trap of a bay, responsible for a fatal mutiny, would stay off Europeans' radar for good. Yet merely a few decades on, it turned into the heart of one of history's biggest land heists. By the mid-1600s, Europe was obsessed with a huge trend: hats made from beaver felt. The hunger for them was endless. Canada's thick, icy woodlands yielded the planet's finest beaver furs. French merchants dominated the fur business back then, but their routes were a total logistics disaster. They'd pack up canoes, paddle thousands of miles via the Great Lakes and tangled river networks, hauling gear overland on portages just to haul pelts to the Atlantic. 2 French adventurers, Radisson and Groseilliers, eyed a map and spotted a game-changer. The Hudson Bay anchors a vast watershed, with almost every big river in central Canada draining straight into it. Ship a hefty ocean vessel right into the bay, and you'd skip the grueling land treks entirely. Park at the river mouths, swap goods directly with the Cree and other native groups hauling furs downstream, then head back to Europe. Pure geographic genius. When France's king shot down their plan, they pitched it to England's monarch. Seeing the brilliance in the layout, King Charles II issued a royal charter in 1670. But he went further than approval to trade. He handed them control over the whole Hudson Bay drainage basin. Dubbed Rupert's Land, This chunk covered a jaw-dropping 1.5 million square miles. That's a solid third of today's Canada, reaching into what are now spots in the U.S. like Minnesota and North Dakota. With that single signature, the Hudson's Bay Company sprang to life. It grew into a vast, relentless business juggernaut. The HBC erected stout trading forts at key river inlets along the bay, such as York Factory and Fort Churchill. They ran things like their own nation, minting currency, crafting laws, and steering a whole continent's commerce. Nowadays, the Hudson's Bay Company endures as a big retail outfit, holding the title of the oldest joint stock company in the English-speaking world. The Bay powered Canada's foundational economy and essentially sketched out the nation's borders as we recognize them. Still, for all the riches and legacy it delivered, the Hudson Bay isn't exactly a cozy companion for today's Canadians. This enormous waterway functions like a savage weather machine, wrecking the country's geographic norms. Typically, vast waters serve as huge climate balancers for land. Seas soak up summer heat and dole it out in winter, keeping coastal spots milder than inland ones. Europe's Gulf Stream, for instance, lets folks thrive at sky-high latitudes. The Hudson Bay, though, defies those patterns. Rather than heating things up, it chills the mainland. Freezing solid each year strips away its warming power. When icy blasts from the polar vortex plunge south from the far north, they skip over any balmy sea. They race across 1.2 million square kilometers of smooth, endless ice, gaining momentum while holding their killer cold. The bay serves as a colossal chute, shoving Arctic conditions way farther south than nature intended. It shoves the permafrost boundary, the zone of perpetually frozen soil, far into Canada's heartland. And this icy powerhouse spawns one of Earth's oddest population quirks. Canada ranks second globally in land size, nearly 10 million square kilometers. Check its population map, though, and that sprawl's mostly a mirage. About 90% of its 40 million people cluster within 160 kilometers of the U.S. border, a narrow band of habitation clinging to the nation's far south. The reason? The Hudson Bay carves a huge gap in usable land right in the middle, flanked by the rugged Canadian Shield and fueled by its savage freeze, rendering north-central Canada off-limits for big farming or cities. The bay's harsh geography and freezing climate shove Canada's population southward as much as possible, jamming right up against the U.S. border. In essence, it shatters the map, reshaping a sprawling continent-wide nation into a thin ribbon of human activity that at times echoes Chile's elongated shape. You might ask, if this enormous inlet is nothing but a frigid, desolate obstacle repelling people, why does Canada care? Here's the reality. While it disrupts settlement patterns, the Hudson Bay Basin secretly fuels the whole nation. Though brutally inhospitable for habitation, its watershed drives massive economic value. Those enormous swift rivers draining central North America into the bay offer prime spots for green power generation. In areas like Quebec and Manitoba, huge hydro dams rise along bay-bound waterways, including the La Grande Complex. They capture the tremendous pull of gravity as water cascades from the Canadian Shield into the Depression. The power output is mind-blowing. It lights up big cities such as Montreal and Winnipeg, and every year, surplus energy worth millions flows across the border to U.S. grids. On top of that, the same glacial carving and crustal bounce that formed the bay unearthed vast mineral riches along its edges. Shoreline zones brim with nickel, copper, zinc, and diamonds, pumping billions into Canada's mining industry. And with warming worldwide temperatures, Hudson Bay gains fresh strategic weight. It hosts the Port of Churchill in Manitoba, the country's sole deep-water Arctic harbor. As ice breaks up sooner each spring and lingers later into fall, long-blocked routes are unlocking. Over the next few decades, the bay might shift from icy fortress to thriving trade corridor for worldwide shipping. Hudson Bay carves a huge chunk from the map, a shallow, icy, once lethal ocean that controls where a nation's people can settle. Yet it's also a powerhouse of riches and emerging prosperity. It's Canada's true geographic core, even though few locals ever set foot there.